Hello and welcome back to Radio Free Urbanism, a show about urbanism and stuff. I'm your host, Alex Williams, and today I'm joined by the most delightful of people. That's right, the number one most delightful person, Nic Laporte.
Hi, thank you for that wonderful, illustrious introduction. It's totally uncalled for, but I appreciate it.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I'm expecting a little bit more yapping from you today since we're only a two-person show. So I need like a little bit more from you today, Nic. So we'll start. We'll start with your update. Give us an update. What's going on?
Well, I do have to say, we promised we'd have a very special guest today. That's my fault. There's miscommunications in the timing and everything, and my ability to always keep my phone on silent when somebody was trying to message me on Instagram, and I didn't notice until it was too late. So that's my bad this morning. Okay, I'm sorry, everybody. Rachel's not here, but we'll have her. She's going to be on in the future. Don't worry. She'll be back.
She will be.
She will be. But I just got back from Seattle. I was in Seattle for a couple days. I got to meet up with Hanok from Best Side Cycling, who was a guest on the show just last week. And he showed me around. We did a nice bike tour for about 3 hours. Got a really good picture of what the city's like. I've been there a few times, but I've never been there on two wheels. And I've always said this, the best way to see a city is to get on two wheels. You can see a lot in a short amount of time and really get a better granular picture of just the streetscape. So it was really great to see. And I'm really, really impressed with Seattle and what they've done, because the biking network is expanding. It's exploding. It's crazy to see what they have already, but just looking around to see how much is being built currently, like especially along the waterfront. There's a beautiful separated two-way cycle track where there used to be a massive two-deck viaduct that went along the Alaskan Way on the waterfront, and it's completely transformed. It's amazing. There's a sky bridge there for pedestrians to get access over to the waterfront from Pike Place, the famous market there. But even in the suburbs, they've been building a lot more stuff. Bike routes, like cycleways that... So Hanok posted a video about this. We did a little tour around the more suburban cycleways. They're not too different from the ones here in Vancouver that aren't very good. There is some treatment. It's better than nothing, but there's a lot more that needs to be done there. But that's everywhere. So they've done something, which is fantastic. But yeah, overall, Seattle's really great. And I have to say, the Climate Pledge Arena, which is where the hockey team plays, the basketball, amazing area. You see so many venues like this around North America, and a lot of them are just surrounded by parking lots and stuff like that. Not much going on, but it's a whole complex. It's right beside the Space Needle. There's parks there, beautiful water fountains, lovely walkways with twinkling lights, restaurants surrounding the area. It's so nice. And even there was a parking garage. It was like a 5-level parking garage. And I was like, yeah, you got to have, parking somewhere at least. But then I put my drone out the next day, and there was literally a garden, like a community garden on top of this thing. They're actually doing something with that space and not just to store cars. It was pretty cool. But yeah, Seattle, they're doing a good job down there.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. I think a lot of good things, at least bike-wise, seem to be happening in the Pacific Northwest. And I'll say too, you're talking about the explosion of this infrastructure, just the rapid expansion of it. And the great thing about cycling infrastructure and pedestrian infrastructure is it's relatively inexpensive to build. So we get to do a lot of things for a relatively small amount of money on those big city scales. And a lot of the time, the infrastructure is already existing. You might just need to put down some concrete barriers to turn a shoulder or a parking lane or just the side of a street into a comfortable place for people of all ages and abilities to ride their bikes.
Yeah, it might not be pretty, but it can work.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I want to mention, we've got a couple people in the chat here. We're recording on kind of a weird time, but we've got Skitch and Jen in the chat, both wishing us a happy Halloween. If you want to join the live chat on our show, you can go to patreon.com/radiofreeurbanism, and for as little as $1 a month, you can join us live every Wednesday evening, or usually every Wednesday evening, to record these podcasts and ask questions and join with us in the chat. But with that, I wanted to share a little bit of news. I have a pretty interesting update, I think, and that is I'm running for City Council here in Calgary in Ward 11 where I live. So I'm super stoked about this. I'm not going to make this show all about my political run or anything, but I will share some interesting insights from the experience because I think it's important for people with a variety of perspectives to show up to city council to speak, to participate in city engagements, and to run in city elections and provincial and federal and state and all of those other elections as well. But particularly potent for what we talk about on this show is municipal elections. So I'm excited to be involved and joining conversations about how our city can be better.
That's amazing. Congratulations. That's a big step, I think you're the right person to do that job. You got a lot of spirit, and I think most importantly, you're good at listening to people. So I think you're going to be really good in that position. I hope you get it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks, Nick. And I have another announcement, or not an announcement, I guess news to share. I also, just like Nick, I went somewhere and I did something. I went to Ottawa to a Transit for Tomorrow summit. This was hosted by Environmental Defense. And this was my first time in Ontario altogether, actually. And it was a great conversation. We talked about the way transit funding is a little bit broken, the way that cities are often overburdened by having to do all of these things. And the provincial and federal governments often only step in when there's a fancy ribbon to be cut, when there's a capital project to be funded and done, which of course we appreciate. But what we really need is funding dollars. We need to actually be able to operate the systems that we have already. And I was chatting with some folks from Calgary Transit who were saying really the reason that Calgary Transit is not in as bad a situation as maybe Metrolinx or or other big transit agencies like the TTC is because Calgary Transit just never expanded as big as those other systems. And so our system is a lot smaller, which means we have a little bit less infrastructure and operations to maintain. So that's basically the gist of what the conference was about. It was great. If you send me a message, I can talk to you more about it. But maybe most importantly, I wanted to show you the cards I've added to my collection. So here, you'll remember I went to Montreal earlier this year and I got this Opus card. And I went to Edmonton earlier this year as well and got this ARC card. Then on this trip, the first thing I got was at the airport. I got this Ottawa specialized Presto card. And then we went over to Gatineau and I got this STO card. And then we also, because we had to, get everything that we could, we also got the black Presto card that you'll typically see in Toronto and other places around Ontario. So yeah, it was actually, it was a lot of fun. It was fun riding transit and getting to see a system that I'd not seen before. I will say the C train is miles and miles better than the O train, and they do have double-decker buses. So that was kind of fun. That was fun to actually get to sit up in the top of the bus and get a bit different of perspective as we're going through the city. So yeah, it was a good trip, and I'm excited to continue growing my collection of transit cards. Maybe Calgary will someday have a special card that I can collect as well.
Did you collect some people too? I saw you met some cool people at least. Even some people that I know here in Vancouver were down there.
Yeah. So I hung out a lot with a pretty big contingent. There were a lot of people who came from Vancouver to Ottawa for the summit, which was great to see. Dennis Agar was obviously kind of leading the troop. He's leading Movement YVR, and that's their transit riders group.
Metro Vancouver's Transit Rider Union.
Yeah. So it was great to see him out there. He was very busy talking with a lot of different people, but we chatted for a little while. And then also there was Michelle from Vision Zero. Michael was there. I'm trying to remember Will, and I'm gonna blank on the other names here. There was John. I'm trying to think who else. But yeah, and then I also met people from TTC riders, and who else was out there? I think somebody was there from Ottawa Transit Riders, but we didn't we didn't meet them. Oh, there was Cheryl from Edmonton Transit Riders as well. So that was great to see Edmonton Transit Riders out there because we'd like to do some collaboration with them. You know, we have a lot of the same issues, and I'd say in Canada we're probably two of the most similar transit systems. If you compare all the big cities to each other. So it was great meeting everybody. We went out, for drinks and food, and we rode transit together, saw museums together, and overall just had a really great time kind of bonding with people from across the country who are in similar work advocating for better transit. So yeah.
That's
Speaking
amazing.
of better transit, Nick, you've got an interesting story to start
This
us
is a
off
hot
with.
note. Yeah, we've got tons of news today. It's crazy. Like some weeks, we go through stuff, like we can't find anything. We just come up with a topic or something that we want to talk about. But man, there's been a lot of news today. This one we're talking about quickly. We need Ethan here, so we're going to save it for next week. But I just have to mention, federal government is going ahead with high-speed rail between Quebec City and Toronto. Holy smokes, ladies and gentlemen, it might be happening. It might be happening. Does this coincide with what you were doing in Ottawa? It feels like the timing is right there. This is not the same as local transit, but...
Yeah, actually, honestly, so there was an MP from the Liberal government who showed up. I forget what his name was, but his take on the whole thing, because we're there talking about like operational funding, right? We want just help us support the systems that we have, and his take, and you can find this in the CBC article about this whole event. His take was, no, we're only focused on capital projects. If they need funding, talk to the provincial government, right? And this happens, I'm sure this happens in other countries too, but especially in Canada, there's always this no, that's their responsibility. No, they need to do this. Mm-hmm. And to be fair, that is the case a lot of the times, but it felt a little bit dismissive. And as much as I'm hopeful and optimistic that our federal government will get a high-speed rail off the ground, especially in this corridor, it's one of the most perfect corridors, honestly, on planet Earth for a high-speed rail, right? It makes a lot of sense. But part of me also feels like this is a last-ditch effort of please, 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 please elect us in the next election, right?
Yeah.
It kind of feels a little bit like they're throwing anything at the wall. The $30 billion transit fund that the federal government created doesn't start till 2026. After the next election. And so this, I get similar vibes from. I think this high-speed rail will eventually happen, but it's going to be a question of whether it's Via Rail or GO or whatever else who actually ends up getting this job done. I'm not pessimistic about it, but I'm just kind of we'll wait and see. We'll see.
I'm so pessimistic about this. There's going to be something that's going to get in the way, whether that's, Trudeau getting elected out and there's going to be a conservative government in that's just going to scrap the whole idea because trains are stupid and it's a culture war thing for some fucking reason. It doesn't make any sense. Or the funding, it's going to be way too expensive. My hope is that, it's going to go ahead. It's going to be super successful. It's going to be reasonably priced. It's going to be very competitive with flying and driving, and people are going to use it, and then they're going to expand it all the way down to London, Hamilton and Windsor, and it's just going to be, this is success. It's going to be amazing. But I'm just it's the first time I'm going to step on a train, I'm going to be 60 years old. That's my guess, 2050. So we'll see. We're going to talk about it next week because I really want to hear what Ethan has to say about this. So yeah, hopefully he's here next week. We haven't had him on in a while. Who's that guy? I don't even know what he's doing. We'll figure it out. Anyway, we do have a topic here, and this was actually submitted in our Discord a few weeks ago by Skitch, and I think it's something we need to talk about here. So This is trunk or treat. So Skitch asked, what do you got? What are your thoughts on trunk or treat? So trunk or treat is essentially when cars get into a oval or a circle in a parking lot, and they have things to give out to children in each trunk. And the kids walk around and, collect treats like you would trick-or-treating in a neighborhood, but instead it's a parking lot with cars. So this is something I've never personally experienced. I grew up in a small town. At that age, when I was trick-or-treating, I would just run around the neighborhood and go to different houses, the very traditional thing. But I think, Alex, you're probably better at talking about this because this is something you've actually done.
Yeah. So It's interesting. We did this growing up, but typically only when Halloween fell on a Sunday. We didn't trick or treat if it was on a Sunday in my family. And so we would get together with other families who also didn't trick or treat if it fell on a Sunday. We'd get together usually the Saturday before, the night before, and we would do this trunk or treat. So it was a nice way to kind of bring our community together as like, okay, these are the people who are giving candy out tonight, right? And you know what, and for that particular aspect of kind of the culture I grew up in, I think it worked well, right? Like I think that's something that makes sense. I don't think anybody should be anti trunk or treat just because it involves cars or something, right? Like that, like relax, guys, relax. I also think that there's an aspect that maybe we haven't thought about yet, because I know we discussed this a little bit in our Discord server with our patrons, which if you want to join this Discord server, we're chatting all week about all sorts of different topics. If you want to join that, that's patreon.com/radiofreeurbanism. But yeah, we didn't talk about potentially some accessibility benefits to trunk or treat. Maybe some people have trouble walking between houses, depending how spread out your neighborhood is, or even depending how many people are even giving out candy that night on Halloween, right? Like you might end up having gaps in your neighborhood. So there's that aspect to it. There's also like a lot of people, including myself, I have steps in front of my house. Like you can't even get a meter off of the sidewalk without having to go up steps. And so for people who might use wheelchairs or walkers or other mobility aids, this could potentially be a good way for them to get out. I know sometimes the mall does like a trick-or-treating thing, like the stores will give out candy on Halloween and kids can go trick-or-treating through the mall.
Retirement homes?
Or retirement
like that,
homes, yeah. Right? So I think I think that it is a solution to a concern or an issue perhaps, or an ability need that some people might have on Halloween. I don't know. Well, like what are your kind of impressions of it or thoughts on what I said there?
I'm not going to demonize this whole practice. It's a symptom of our built environment in some ways, but I really like what you said, because so this popped up on the Fuck Cars subreddit 2 days ago, and the title is just Fuck Trunk or Treat, and the subtitle was Trunk or Treat is undermining community connections and promoting car culture. I disagree with that. A big part is what you said. This was ability for your community to come together. It was an opportunity, right? Which I think is important. But yeah, I don't think it's promoting car culture as much as it's just a symptom of it. This is if we had a community where A, we didn't even have the space to do this, and B, a community where cars weren't so focused in our zeitgeist that you would think to do that because you wouldn't need to. Everything would be closer together and we wouldn't have to worry about this. You think about so many places around the world where this can't even happen. It wouldn't even be possible. So it's really it's interesting. It's an interesting byproduct of the way that we've built our world. But I don't think it needs to be as demonized as it is at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, not at all. Jen in the chat here says treat trails in community centers or weather pending in parks with foldable tables decorated sounds fun. So there are other ways that you can also do something similar to trunk or treat, and it's just another thing that we can do during Halloween, right? It just so happens that it involves cars, and I don't think people need to get so worked up over it. Do you want to read Skitch's comment here? That's a good one too.
Yeah, Skitch says in the live chat, I was in Tucson over the weekend and they had a really cute trick or treat and costume contest event along their main shopping districts. Businesses were handing out candy. It was really cool and accessible. They even decorated one of their streetcars and kids could go on it to get candy. Such a cool alternative to traditional neighborhoods that may have steps or houses not participating. Yeah, absolutely. It's just another place to gather where you can actually have this happen and make it more effective, especially if you have a community where there's, like, for example, there's a very infamous, I would say, neighborhood in Vancouver called Shaughnessy, not far from where I live, where it's one of the wealthiest places. Beautiful. And it's like, if you go down the streets, it's almost like a picturesque Neighborhood. Oh, perfect. If you've seen the movie Happy Gilmore with Adam Sandler, his grandma's house is literally it's literally there. Like it's in that neighborhood. That's where they filmed it. So it's just like that picturesque American dream neighborhood with the big trees and big houses and stuff. But half of it's just empty all the time. And forget Halloween. There's not going to be anywhere. You're going to be going between so many houses just to get anywhere. So to have that alternative like this in Tucson where you can go somewhere where all your kids can do this, and it's maybe more inviting and less drab, I would say, than a parking lot with cars in it. It was cool.
Yeah. And I will say too, like it's nice. It's nice to come together, especially as some neighborhoods age. I was talking to my neighbors a couple weeks ago about Halloween, and my neighbors are quite elderly, and they've lived on this street for 50 years, right? Like they're very familiar with it, and they're familiar with who's moved in and who's moved out, and they were telling me, how much fewer kids stopped by on Halloween, and I asked them how many they got last year, and they said, oh, maybe 5. So I'm curious to see how many end up stopping by my place. My sisters and I will be giving out candy while we watch the finale of that Marvel show, Agatha House of Harkness, or Agatha All Along, whatever the title is. It's kind of nice and Halloween-y themed. But yeah, we'll be counting how many kids stop by, and I think it's a good indicator of the health of a neighborhood to kind of get that metric of how many people are out and about and knocking on doors. And it's also just a great time to kind of see the other people who live in your neighborhood.
Absolutely.
So yeah, we'll see how this Halloween goes.
And if you can, don't drive on Halloween. Just don't do it.
It is the night with the most traffic incidents and deaths in North America. So be very conscious, be safe, and maybe consider while you're walking around out there how you can make that area better and safer for kids to walk, right? We want to be able to build kids into independent, capable individuals, and I think that starts with how they're able to walk around our neighborhoods. But let's get on to our next story. Do you want to take that away, Nick?
Sure. Yeah, this is coming from Ontario. So we've been harping on Ford and the whole bike lane situation, and then that is not over. We're going to be talking about that, I'm sure, in the future. But this is another thing that Ford is doing, is continuing to cut gas taxes for people buying gasoline and diesel. So they're moving to extend a 5.7 cent cut to the provincial gas tax until next summer. Doug Ford says his government will soon put forward legislation that, if passed, will keep the tax at 9 cents per liter until June 30th. The legislation would also extend that to 5.3% cut for the price of diesel fuel. And this is essentially it's a handout. It's a handout to people who are driving and buying fuel. So he's saying that this should save the average Ontario household $380 over 3 years since the cuts were first introduced. So yeah, he just keeps extending these cuts. And a lot of people are just commenting saying, hey, this is basically trying to buy votes with the money that you've already spent in taxes. So this is coming after 2 years ago in 2022, when the Ford government cut license fees, renewal fees, and gave rebates to people who had already paid them at that point, which was only a few $100s. And somebody pointed this out, and I think this is very fascinating, the way we look at the way we spend our money in taxes and the way that our discourse is around this. If you're listening to the show, you've definitely heard this, and you know that is bullshit, which is, like cyclists don't pay for our roads, pay whatever taxes, insurance, and everything before you think you have a right to the streets, which is obviously nonsense. But here Ford and the Ford government has literally taken away the only things that a driver pays that are actually like adding to that fund to pay for the streets. So the math's been done. If you added up all of the costs associated with driving in Ontario, it doesn't even cover, I think it was between 60 and 80% of the highways, just the highways. It doesn't even cover the whole amount. And that's if it all went there, and it does not. So we're already paying for it, and he's further subsidizing drivers in Ontario to make it easier to do so. And again, when you look at it at face value, it can seem like a good thing to do to help somebody have a more affordable year, right? That's great. But at the end of the day, you're just digging a hole deeper to make us all pay more. We're all going to end up paying more in the end, especially people who are at the bottom of the rung. And when you actually crunch the numbers, you find out that even before all of this and giving more subsidy to drivers, people who are taking transit are paying more for the streets, literally more of their money. Hard numbers are going into the streets than people driving, which is insane. It's fucking insane. So I think that's something people need to realize as a whole. We know this here, but I feel like we just need to keep spreading the word. Like, driving is so heavily subsidized that it makes it easy to do so.
Yeah.
And we need to stop that.
And it's kind of like you don't see the subsidy, right? Like, because it's such a standard expectation, right?
Yeah.
And it's, and I can appreciate like the way, so, okay, we have a bit of a chicken and an egg situation, right? Like, we talk about needing to build better communities, right? And of course, in my YouTube video, when I made a video talking about me going car free, people say, well, what would you do if you had 2 kids and had to take them to hockey practice and do this and this and this? And I said, well, yeah, like, obviously in that case, like in that situation, I'd probably have a car. I'd probably drive, right? And it's not that I don't drive at all now, but I don't own my own car. And so I think when we're talking about this, obviously people are going to try and make decisions that are best for them, right? And if you just like skyrocket this gas tax, people are going to feel that squeeze, right? Because a lot of people like do legitimately have to drive around places because that's how we've built our environment, right? That's how we've built the places around us. And so it's kind of like a tricky, where do we tax? How do we tax? What do those taxes go towards? And I think one of the biggest things that we should start with is just like you said, being more informed and having kind of more of an open budget that people can take a look at and really see like, where is that money going towards? I have a friend who he is like super ultra conservative in the States. And he, at one point, he was actually working for the BC Liberal Party, which of course we know was a conservative party in BC. It was just called BC Liberals. He at one point was working for them, and he was working in Victoria. And he told me, he said he felt like, even though that's the highest taxes he's ever paid was when he was living in Victoria, versus when he's lived in like Idaho and other states like that in the US. He said that's where he felt like he got the most bang for his buck, right? Like, people want to feel like they're actually getting their money's worth when they pay taxes, whether that's, something like this gas tax, or it's something like their income taxes, property taxes, like whatever it is. People need to feel like they're getting their money's worth, right? We look at transit fares. In Calgary, I pay $3.80 for a single transit ticket, right? And for a monthly pass, I pay $115, right? In Ontario, in Toronto specifically, it's significantly more expensive than that, right? But that's a decision that's made based on what people are getting. If Calgary Transit tried to raise their fare right now, people would be pissed off because people aren't feeling like they're getting their money's worth out of that. So this is kind of the perspective that I take on these things, is like, we need to be educated and we need to actually like know where our money is going and see where it's going. And you're right that like our roads and driving, like, it's all heavily subsidized. And we need to have a real conversation about how or if we're paying for that, right? Mm-hmm. That's kind of my broad perspective on like the whole thing in general. Yeah.
But it is difficult, right? This isn't like a simple thing where you're saying, hey, we need to change this and it's all going to be hunky-dory. That's not the case either. Like, even if something as simple as parking, we've seen this come up time and time again when you bring these topics up. They say, oh, if you charge market rate for parking in a city, that's going to screw over a bunch of people. And you're like, yeah, it will in the short term. It will. There are people who are on the edge who have to drive into a city in their current situation, and it's going to fuck them. Like, that's just the way it is. But you have to look at the big picture and see down the road where we can get to. It's only going to get worse if we keep going down this track.
Yeah.
Where you're going to screw down more people in the long run if we don't make the changes to make a healthier city. And that's just like one step at a time. It's all these small things that we need to move.
Yeah.
And to move that needle is going to take a long time, but we need to make those steps and make those hard decisions to do the work to make a better world for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of like, I'm a big fan of carrots, right? Like doing things that like make you
baby
want
carrots or like a
to do
whole.
it. I like them both. I like them both. Steamed, cooked, raw. They're roasted carrots, fantastic. I love all of it. But carrots, like, like things that are going to draw you into doing these things that are a little bit more sustainable, both from an environmental perspective and an economic perspective, right? Like if you were able to, if we were able to walk down to a corner store very comfortably in your neighborhood, right? I know, Nick, you've never experienced that in your life. But if you're able to do that, right, like you're more likely to do that. And so then a gas tax isn't going to affect you as much. But if you live in a community, in a neighborhood that is built to force you, right, like the carrot and the stick are forcing you to get into your car, to drive to get your groceries, to do all of those things, right, that's going to complicate your relationship with paying for roads. But of course, it's also going to make it so that we have to pay more for roads collectively, right? So I'm a big fan of going down to the community level, seeing where the grocery stores, where the places that people need to get to, and like really focusing in on actually making it possible for them to get there. But I want to share Jen's comment here. It's funny. Do you want to read that one, Nick?
Yeah, Jen says in the chat, I want the government to subsidize my trips to Disneyland. I'm going there to represent Canada and learn from these other citizens of the world visiting the park. Yeah, it's a good point because people need to do that. They need things to do that blows off steam, and going to Disneyland is one of those things. And why wouldn't that be the government's responsibility to help pay for that?
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I think this is interesting. Do you have any final thoughts on this story, Nick?
No, just that I think I need to really reiterate that it's not easy. It's not easy. We got to do the hard work. And there was some saying I heard a while ago, and I was like, that makes sense. It's tough men make easy times. Easy times make soft men. Soft men make hard times. Hard times make tough men. Something like that. Basically, we need to not be soft. We need to make our times easy. I don't know what I'm saying. Anyway,
I get what you're saying. We're all adults here, and I think we're all quite capable of making the world a better place. And it's not necessarily going to be an easy thing, but I think it's definitely something that we can do. But in good news, I think. There is this article I'm sharing from CBC. It says Alberta publishes new accessibility design guide, but minister says more needs to be done. So this is actually something that I'm a big fan of, is improving accessibility in our public spaces and in our city, because different people have different needs, right? And you obviously start with building for the most amount of people, but the more people that you can catch on the edges, that you're able to provide safe, accessible, comfortable spaces for, the better off your city is going to be. And the way I want to frame this conversation as we talk about this is that these accessibility issues are for you. These are not for somebody else. These aren't for somebody down the street or somebody you've never met. These are actually for you. And the reason I want to frame it that way, I was having a conversation with somebody who she asked me, she says, well, why would we do all of these accessibility things? Like, isn't that just like a waste of money? And to be fair, like, these are marginal costs, right? And I get that marginal costs add up, right? And it can make it more difficult to build. You have more boxes to check, things like that. But with these accessibility design guides, um, these are all things that you might someday need, right? We're all temporarily able-bodied, right? At some point in your life, your knees are going to get bad, your hips are going to hurt, your back's going to hurt, your eyesight might go, or it might, at the very least, get worse. Same with your hearing, right? I have plenty of friends who have hearing aids. I wear glasses myself, right? There are all sorts of different needs. Your legs might stop working entirely, and you might end up wheelchair bound, right? Like you never know what is going to happen, but it is going to happen, right? At some point, you're going to need some of these accessibility features. Not all of them, but some of them. Some of the things in here in this new guide include elevator controls providing auditory confirmation that they've been activated. Universal washrooms are also to feature change spaces with adult-sized change tables. Water bottle filling stations are to be located in buildings with barrier-free travel paths. Similar to exit signs, accessibility signs are also required to point out barrier-free building entrances, washrooms, elevators, and parking spaces. So these are all pretty simple things. Like a lot of it is signage, right? And these are obviously not something that you're going to be expected to implement in your home. And it's also not something that we're going to be knocking buildings down for. But as new buildings happen, we'll improve these spaces. So, yeah. What do you think, Nick?
That's great. I think there's a lot of little things that sometimes you just don't notice in your regular life, that even something as simple as a bag button, at an intersection, if it doesn't have certain feedback, can be kind of annoying. Not only annoying, but you just don't know if it works. Like you go to a bag button, you press it, and a lot of them they'll have like those yellow and silver ones that are just touch contact, and some of them beep. Right? So you know that it's actually activated. Some of them hits a little tiny light, LED, that flashes. Some of them don't do anything, and you just don't know. And I've noticed that a lot in Canada. We don't have a lot of feedback on them. But when you go to the States, a lot of them have auditory feedback. Like you'll press it and it goes, wait. So you know, like, oh, you pressed it, right? And then it'll tell you, safe to walk once the light's on. And we need those things for people who aren't, completely able-bodied, people who are blind or deaf, to navigate our world. So it's super important to have these things working and have redundancies in place to make sure that we're not limiting access to people who should have it. Everybody, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I know that's something experienced a lot on transit, is whether people are able to get on or off transit, right? A lot of the time, if you show up at a station that you're hoping the elevator works, and you show up at the station and the elevator's broken, congratulations, you just took a 1 hour transit ride and you cannot complete your journey, right?
Yeah.
So I do think these accessibility features are fantastic and important. Jen says, I feel like they could add a please in front of the wait. Yeah, in Calgary, you press the button and it goes, wait, and then you stand there and you wait, and then it beeps and it welcomes you over to the other side. I noticed in Ottawa when I was there, you have to press and hold the button for like 3 seconds, and then it will give an auditory cue. And so it's like what's really interesting to me about this sort of thing is that we talk like it is about a very small group in the population, right? Like, oh, not everybody's going to use the auditory thing. But how many times are you walking down the street or driving or biking and you see people just like looking at their phone, right? And you see it if you're driving and the person in front of you is looking at their phone for some reason at the stoplight, and then the light turns green, you honking the horn is the auditory signal to them to say like, hey, wake up, right? And same thing as if you're standing at the street corner, that auditory signal can benefit you. The same way that we benefit from curb cuts, right? The same way that we benefit from the tactile strips. All of these things can kind of help guide us around our community, whether you necessarily like quote unquote need them or not. So yeah. One thing I thought was great in Gatineau, they had at the bus stops you could press a button, and then it would speak to you the times that the bus is coming. It would
That's
say
cool.
the 88 is coming in 5 minutes, and I thought that was a fantastic accessibility feature. And not something too hard to add, especially if you're standing at like a pretty major transit stop. That's totally something that should be available, right? So yeah, I like this. I applaud the provincial government for doing this. This is not something on this show. I feel like we hate on the all federal or all levels of government, federal, provincial,
Yeah.
municipal. There's like a lot of things where like this is so bad, this is embarrassing, but this is actually that's great. I'm glad to see something like this. We'll link the full CBC article in the show notes. You can check that out. And they also talked to some advocates in there who shared their perspective on the direction that we're going and whether they feel like we're moving fast enough or not. But it's good to see. It's good progress.
Yeah, absolutely. Something we need more of everywhere. So let's get on it. Let's do it.
Let's
There's a
do
vacuum truck outside, so I'm trying to get really close to my
You're-
mic and turn down
so
the
that
gain.
so that it's not gonna ruin the audio. Well, I'll let you read this next comment here, Nick.
Oh, which comment?
Some listener mail.
We got listener mail. Yes.
Some bloop 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 listener mail.
This is very topical. We got a news story attached to this one for sure. This is from Jen Hall. So, is jaywalking permitted where you live? If not, do you, quote, break the law, unquote? Do you know anyone that's been fined for jaywalking? Alex, why don't you go first?
Yeah, so in Calgary, and hopefully, well, I'm talking that the vacuum truck wraps up its job, but I'm assuming it's not quick work. But in Calgary, I actually don't know what the fines are for jaywalking, or even if there are fines. I know I talked to I think it was my like driving instructor when I was doing my driving test. I was like, what are the rules, and I guess the take is you just be responsible. If somebody's crossing the street, like you stop for them, right? Like wherever it happens to be. We don't have as strict of rules like I know there are in the UK and Vancouver, from what you've told me, that with zebra crossings, painted crossings, unmarked crosswalks, things like that. In Calgary, I actually find that most people are pretty reasonable about crossing the street, about where we cross the street, and also about drivers stopping for us to cross the street, whether that's at a crosswalk or not. I've never been honked at for jaywalking, though I also choose to jaywalk at times when I'm not putting myself at risk. But yeah, no, I think it's kind of just a normal thing, not a thing that is like rampant, but it's just kind of a normal, typical. People cross the street when it's safe to cross and when they need to go places. I will say, though, I did live somewhere once upon a time in the US where people did get fined for jaywalking. I have seen police turn on their sirens and chase people down for jaywalking. And it was like, I think it was, I don't know, $100, maybe $175. Like it was a number that I was like, really? But I guess they needed the money. It was a pretty quiet town, so yeah, it was interesting that that's something they cared that much about.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Obviously, we know about it here. It was something that was Jay was something that was like a slur, not a slur necessarily, but just like an unflattering term, like a loser. And it is something that the auto industry allegedly promoted to say, hey, these pedestrians are getting in the way. They're jaywalkers. The jaywalkers are getting in the way, and they're the reason why they're getting hit by cars. They need to get out of the streets. And they became laws in many places. Here in Vancouver, yeah, jaywalking is illegal. It's not a crime. It's not criminal, but you can get a ticket from the bylaw. It's a part of the traffic bylaws. I don't know. The police give them out. I think it's $109 from what my research has showed me. But I've never heard of anybody getting that. I got stopped by the police my first day ever in Vancouver back in 2017. I went out downtown to meet a friend, and as I was coming home late at night, it was probably 2 a.m., I crossed the street mid-block, and a car started coming really fast over a hill, so I like jogged across, and then it was a police car, and he came to stop me. And it wasn't because I was jaywalking. He stopped me because it looked suspicious because I was running across the street, I guess. And I was just like, I don't know, I just moved here. I live over. He's like, okay, have a good night. It was fine, but yeah, I've never heard of anybody getting a ticket.
Yeah. I don't know anybody in Calgary who's gotten a ticket. But Jen says they're $115 in Calgary. And it's specifically talking about the no crossing signs on 5th Street and 7th Ave. 7th Avenue in Calgary is where the trains go. So that's like you don't want to cross there, right? Like that's a dangerous situation. So I feel like that makes a little bit more sense. But apparently in 2016 they handed out 430 jaywalking tickets, which was 200 more than the previous year. And this was talking so far. This was published August 5th. So I guess they do hand them out in Calgary. I guess people do get fined. I've never met anyone who has gotten fined. And of course we're talking about, in this specific article, it does mention 7th Avenue Southwest, which is where the trains go, which is like a big, like that's not really a place you want to be jaywalking, right? Like it's a level crossings the whole way around. So yeah, I don't know. It's interesting, but it's good news. Do you want to share the news that happened this week? Another great thing.
This is a win. Absolutely. This is coming out of New York City, one of my favorite cities in the world. Jaywalking is now legal in New York City following the city council's legislation, which became law after Mayor Eric Adams did not sign or veto within 30 days. So council member Mercedes Narcisse, I don't know how to say that name, but that's how I'm going to go with it. The bill's sponsor highlighted that the previous jaywalking law disproportionately affected Black and Latino residents who received over 90% of the jaywalking tickets last year. The new law permits crossing outside of crosswalks and against signals, though pedestrians must still yield to other traffic. City spokesperson Liz Garcia warned that while jaywalking is decriminalized, it remains risky and could lead to liability in collisions. Advocates argue that focusing on safer street design and speed control rather than penalizing jaywalking is more effective for public safety. The Legal Aid Society supports the legislation, viewing it as a move to reduce unnecessary police stops. Yes, absolutely. Fantastic. Good job, New York, because you know what? There's so much jaywalking going there all the time. Like, go to New York City. It's rampant. Should it be illegal? Should it be criminalized? Absolutely not. I think this is a great move. You still need to be careful in the streets, but this is a move in the right direction to say, hey, you shouldn't be a criminal to just getting where you're going by crossing the street. It's crazy.
Yeah.
These are very, very pedestrian-friendly spaces. They should be, and it should be something that we can all do to get around. This is free mobility, and it's not. It just doesn't make any sense for this to be on the books in this day and age.
Yeah, like we want people to get around our communities, and obviously that comes a lot down to design, but you're not going to make your community safer by criminalizing people crossing the street somewhere else, right? Like we talk about desire lines and stuff, right? You just make an empty field and you let people walk through it wherever they want. You're going to find some specific diagonal lines that take specific routes to get around that field to whatever destination they're going to go. And I think we see the same things on our streets, and I don't think people should be penalized for that. Absolutely not. So yeah, this was good. Do we have any other news, any other comments, any other things we should mention? We're kind of reaching the end here.
No, I don't know. That seems like it's it. Oh, I did this. We got some time, so I might as well just talk about some other stuff. Here we got, so talking about this jaywalking thing, and I remember the first time I really thought about it. So there's a show that used to be on TV called New Girl. Absolutely love it. I think I've
Great
watched it
show.
2 or 3 times through
Yeah,
with my wife.
it's fantastic.
We love it. It's like the New Age Friends for anybody who's never seen it, with Zoe Deschanel and some other great cast members. But essentially, there was this one episode where 2 of the characters, Zoe Deschanel's character and I can't remember the other guy's name. Anyway, his character's name's Nick. They're in LA, right? Like a lot of shows and movies are set in, and they're just going out for dinner, and it looks like a local street in LA with parking on either side, and they cross the street mid-block, and there's a cop on his bike, stops them and gives them a ticket. And the gag in the show is it happens 2 more times, and the police officer's like, guys, come on, what are you doing? And he gives them like 3 jaywalking tickets in the span of like an hour or something like that. And it's the first time I was like, this seems like bullshit. Like, what are we doing? Like, it's a quiet street. They're just going to the restaurant right across the street. There's no cars around. Why do they need to be given a ticket just to cross the street? It's so nonsense. But it also opens up this whole picture of how focused cars are in our world. Like, you watch so many sitcoms today, especially within the past 15, 20 years. Like, we're watching through Big Bang Theory right now, and how many of the scenes just take place in cars. Like, it's crazy how focused we are, and how not even focused. That's just part of people's lives. So many things in our life happen inside of a car, conversations we have with people, big moments. It's just, it's a setting, which is kind of sad.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I kind of think about it, do we not have better things to be doing, like bigger fish to fry, than penalizing people for just crossing the street at an unmarked location, especially if they're responsible adults making a decision, looking both ways, especially quiet street, right? Like if I walk from my house to my neighbor's house across the street, I didn't use a crosswalk, right? And so it's all of these like ways where we just like needle in all these little extra rules about how we navigate our communities. And it's just unnecessary, right? Like let people live in their communities. Obviously, like, don't go crossing the highway, right? Like, try to be responsible and sensible here. But like having a ticket for me just being like, oh, I need to get across the street, and I crossed the street in a way that is safe. I yielded, like I paid attention. I didn't run out into traffic. I see no problem with that.
Yeah, and the only times I see people doing it unsafely is, I don't see this very often, but kids running out into traffic, which is just a nature of them. They just don't know yet. Their brains haven't developed enough to realize that. It's a very unsafe place to be a lot of the time without looking. Or people in Vancouver who are mentally unwell and not stable. You'll see this if you go to downtown East Side. There's a huge unhoused population, and you'll often, if you're in a car usually, see them cross the street without looking, and feet first still, right? You stop. But just walking out into traffic and not caring, not looking for whatever reason. Are you going to give all those people tickets, the children and the potentially mentally unwell people? Like, no.
Right. Like we have bigger fish to fry. Like this is just not, it's not worth it. And I'll say too, like on the kids front, a lot of the time they might not see vehicles coming because there might be vehicles parked on the side, right? And so when they step out into the street, they're not seeing because they can't see over the hood of the vehicle, even if it's a smaller car, right? Like they're kids, right? And so that's why I think, doing things like daylighting and having raised crossings and things like that, especially near schools, right? Like especially near playgrounds, right? We set our speed limits in playground zones down to 30 kilometers an hour, but we don't do anything to actually say like, no, but actually seriously slow down, right? So
seriously stop. Seriously.
I think we always end up back on it's our built environment. We have to build our environment for ways that allow people to get around however they'd like to get around, and for our kids to be able to actually enjoy the area that we've built.
Absolutely. Speaking of which,
yeah.
This is just some insider stuff. You guys are getting some extras right here, but this is just some footage I took from Seattle. And this is probably the most built-up intersection I've seen like anywhere.
Oh, wow.
But look at this intersection. Overbuilt? Maybe. I don't know. But it's got like proper, like almost Dutch style. It's got a median in the middle. I think cars can turn out or onto these streets, but not go straight through. And it has separated lanes for bicycles all around the intersection, like a protected intersection. So that Thomas and Dexter. It was like, wow, this is serious.
Yeah, that's very well done.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
With green spaces too, it's great.
Yeah, the only thing that would make it better is near side signals.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But that's a very well designed intersection. Anybody can see, the way that pedestrians are more safely able to cross this. We have shorter crossing distances. We have more visibility for cyclists, for pedestrians. The drivers can see more because there's not people parked right up to the front of the intersection, right? Everybody's experienced that when they're driving around too, is trying to see around the corner when there's somebody parked way too close to the intersection.
Yeah.
The solution to that is just build the intersection so that people cannot physically park right up to the edge.
Like it's crazy. Like in many cities, there won't even be signage to like the legal spot to where you're not supposed to park past. Like in Vancouver, there's everywhere. There's like no signage, but the law is 6 meters from any sidewalk, stop sign, or the curb, whichever is closer to you. Which is like, okay, that's a lot of space. People don't realize how far that is. There's not even signage. People forget. They don't know. Whatever. But even when there is signage, people will park past that and be
because also, like a lot of Calgary stop signs and yield signs will have like a little note written on it that says no parking within 5 meters.
That's something.
I don't know what distance 5 meters is. I couldn't go on the sidewalk and be like, well, this is 5 meters. I could make a wild guess, but it's not going to be exact.
Like
right?
5 big steps.
Yeah.
5 hockey sticks. Yeah, that's the Canadian
right.
way.
It's the same thing. Like you're supposed to be within 40 centimeters of the curb or whatever it is, and it's like I'm assuming this is 40 centimeters, right? Obviously, you always try and get as close to the curb as you can.
Yeah.
But like these things like that, we just need to build our environment in a way that like encourages people to just do the thing that creates a safer street for the people who live in that community, right? And so writing a little note about some arbitrary distance, or probably not arbitrary, but something that you might not be able to interpret on the spot, sitting behind your steering wheel, being like, yeah, I can eyeball that pretty well. That's 5 meters. How do you know? How do I know? Right? And it's the same thing with like driveways and stuff, right? Like people park right at driveways, people park right at alleyways, things like that. So yeah, it always comes back to, the built environment, right? Like just make it harder for people to do the wrong thing, or make it easier for people to do the right thing.
That's a good framing right there. I like that.
Yeah. Just super easy.
All it could take is even the 1 foot bump out in the curb. That's it. And to be enough to get people to stop parking there.
Yeah, just kind of like, okay, this is, a bit of a signal. Don't park here.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can do a lot better. We can do a lot better than what we have been. But is that about gonna do it? Are we
think
wrapped
so.
up?
We just need to mention next week we should, again, this is should have a guest on. It'll be Brandon, the American Feetser. If you don't know him, he's very engaged on social media. He's got a YouTube channel where he does some live streams around his neighborhood, and I think it's Carmel, Indiana. Is that it?
I think so.
He's going to be on to talk about different things like fat bikes and their problem in the Netherlands, and how he became a basically full-time cargo bike rider in the United States. So yeah, we're going to be talking to him. Anyway.
Sweet.
You want to take it away?
This was fun. This was great.
It was good.
It's always weird when it's just two of us, but it was grand and groovy. I enjoyed chatting. I'm looking forward to Ethan being back, and then we can chat with him about the rail projects going on in Canada. We'll see which one comes out first, which one happens first, Windsor to Quebec or Calgary to Edmonton. I'm going to put money on Calgary to Edmonton.
I got money on that,
honestly.
For sure.
Yeah, that's the one I'm feeling best about. But we'll chat with Ethan, our favorite transit guy, about that next week. We'll chat with Brandon, the American Feetser, about bikes and stuff like that next week. And with that, you can find me at Humane Cities on Instagram and YouTube. You can find me also, Alex Williams YYC, especially Alex Williams YYC. If you want to follow my campaign for City Council here in Ward 11, the best area in Calgary, not to brag or anything, but we've got some pretty sick stuff going on. So yeah, if you want to follow me, Alex Williams YYC on Instagram and Threads, YouTube, LinkedIn, I guess. But yeah, this has been Grand and Groovy. Nick, where can we find you?
Oh, you can find me at Nick the Door on Threads, Instagram, and YouTube. Stay tuned on YouTube. I got some stuff cooking. I'm finally going to release another video. It's been a couple months. I'm sorry. But I got some stuff, especially from Seattle. I got another video I'm talking about bike lanes and stuff, about the Ford stuff maybe. Anyway,
Nice.
we're going to take it away here. And I'm going to say 4 wheels bad, 2 wheels good.
And feet first.